I'm Jamie Dockery, Fayette County Extension Agent for Horticulture, and in all of the midst of some confusion around this COVID-19 thing, we're trying to take our message to people as much as we can. So we're going to shoot a short video about achemones and how to grow them for our students who would have come to this class. Achemones are a African violet family member. They are native to Central America and Mexico, where they grow wild in various climates. They have been grown horticulturally for years, centuries even, and they have a few common names. Some of those are Cupid's plant, magic plant, hot water plant. There's a number of things, but by and large I've always heard them referred to as just achemones. So I actually found a supplier. I have personally grown achemones for a number of years and have a purple variety that I love. Could not find a source for tubers. Or rhizomes rather, correctly. These are achemones rhizomes. This is what you guys are receiving to pot up at home. And I'll be honest with you, they look horribly sad and disappointing. You need to be aware, achemones come in all colors, shapes, forms, sizes, and so do their rhizomes. So I brought a couple of examples of extreme ends of this to show you some of the tinier rhizomes that some have, which you can see in this bag. The loose, shiny stuff is perlite. Let me see if I can get one of these out. This is a variety called Tarantella. Some of the tiniest bulbs you will ever see. They're, again, technically rhizomes, but that's what we're talking about. You're going to pot up about 5 to 6 of those, which is what's in the bag. And then by contrast to those tiny ones, there are also varieties that are quite large, very easy to handle, and they all produce similar flowers and behave the same, but these are much, much larger, little scaly things. They remind me of birch catkins. You can see the growing tip on the narrow end just starting to push through, and I think I have a better example. This one is actually already beginning to sprout, and you can see that here. So just handle that delicately. If any of these should happen to break while you're potting, you can simply plant both halves. It will take the back half longer to sprout, but it will form its own plant, and some people propagate that way. It's best to plant these whole. So I'm going to show you how we would begin. I like to use clay pots personally. They drain very well, and they tend to be a little shorter than tall, so they're squattier than typical pots. I like clay because it's very porous. It dries out faster. For those of you who struggle to keep enough water on things, you may want to consider a plastic pot, but you do need to be mindful of overwatering at first. As we pot these little rhizomes, it's natural for any plant in the spring when potted to not require as much moisture. As the plant grows, as much watering I should say, as the plant grows, multiplies, and fills the pot with roots, watering needs increase, and of course the temperatures in the summer increase. So you'll find very minimal watering at first, and then as the season progresses, you'll water more and more. So achemones need semi-moist soil all the time. They don't like extreme drought, and they don't like to stay too wet. Too wet is a serious enemy. So when growing achemones, we simply want to use a soil that's extremely light and fluffy. This is one of my favorite growing mixes we're working with. I should mention, by the way, the ladies at Pemberton's Greenhouse were kind enough to let us come and use their potting bench in this nice backdrop as opposed to messing up our office. So we're grateful that they've allowed us to come and do this here. This is Pro Mix. It can be purchased at better garden centers. It's one of the high-end products, so you pay a little more for it, but it's excellent soil. I also want to mention you can use an African violet mix. I mentioned the achemones are in the African violet family, so they have similar requirements. I like something even lighter than this, so if you buy African violet mix, this is very dry at the moment, but you can see it's mostly peat based, very fluffy, has some vermiculite. You can also use slightly heavier soils if you add perlite. This is the crunchy white stuff that you can buy by the bag, and you just add about 25% of that to your soil mix. As you can see here in the Pro Mix, it's already in there for you. So Pro Mix is an excellent soil for growing achemones and things that need drainage. Starting with the squatty azalea pot, you have enough tubers in your bag to plant one 6-inch pot. So I'm going to add this light fluffy soil. I would actually prefer, if I were doing this at home, that this be a little little moist right now. It's hard to get peat-based mixes wet when they're this dry, but this will be fine. It just may take a little time. The water at first tends to be slow to percolate and trickle in. So I'm going to fill this pot up with enough room to put 1 inch of soil over these rhizomes. I'm going to use the larger ones just because they'll be easier to see on the video. This is a variety called Aphrodite, which is a white with a little bit of blush of blue and lavender. Primarily petunia shades. Yellows, to some extent, yellows are rare. There's a few small flowered yellows. Largely pinks, purples, and whites is what you will find. This tiny little bit of dusty stuff is vermiculite. It is simply in there to provide slight moisture and keep them from drying out in packing. When you receive your package of bulbs, it will be sealed in a Ziploc bag. It cannot remain sealed. If you can't pot these right away, and you have a week or two to get this done, you should open the open the bag, roll the top down, and just put them somewhere warm and dry where they'll stay in with good air circulation. So I'm going to plant these evenly spaced around the pot. I'm going to put the growing tip about middle of this ring, and that way I will have some room for new tubers to be formed around the edge. So it's not always obvious which end is the growing end, so just feel free to space them evenly around the pot. Don't squeeze them right up to the edge. Leave about 1 inch of space for some growth. And we just distribute them evenly around the pot like so. And like I mentioned, you have exactly enough. Some of the smaller tubers will have lots of tubers. Some of the, I keep saying tubers, I mean rhizomes. Some of the varieties will have 5 big ones. Some may have 8 little ones, but they will all produce similar sized plants. Once I've got those horizontally in the pot, some of the little round ones, you'll be not certain which way is horizontal, just plant them on their side. And then I'm going to add 1 inch of soil over top of these achemones. Once I've got that in and just firmed it ever so slightly, notice I'm leaving some room or head space at the top. Filling your pots up tall or nearly to the rim will cause you to have problems watering. If I leave this amount of space, I can fill this with water, it will soak through, and I know I've watered thoroughly. After your achemones rhizomes are potted, comes the hard part. You have to be patient and wait. They're notoriously slow to emerge. It kills me while I'm waiting for this step, but they will eventually. Leaving out something important, we should water. We're going to water this thoroughly and saturate the soil after things are potted. Don't dump it in there quickly. You'll cause big puddles and displacement of the soil. Pour it on gently and continue to water until you have thoroughly saturated this soil. Let it drain well. Never let these stand in a saucer of water. That would be instant death. Let it drain well, and after that initial soaking, you can simply make sure over the next 3 to 7 weeks, while we're waiting for these to emerge, that it just remains slightly damp. Until these plants have roots and are actively growing, it's very easy to rot them. So we want it moist, but ever so slightly, until they begin to sprout. After 3 to 7 weeks, these tubers will begin to sprout. They don't all sprout at the same time. It's not unusual for one to come up and you think you failed, and then weeks later the others start emerging. So don't be in a hurry about that part. Once they start growing, which should be approaching the heat and humidity outdoors they love, about end of May, I will start transitioning these indoor started plants outside. You can also find that they may take so long to sprout that it's above 60 degrees at night outside, and you could go out with them. A couple of growing tips. They do not like direct sunlight. They are bright shade plants. So these are going to be great in baskets under trees. Don't go basket first. 6 rhizomes is not enough. You always have to go to the next size up. So if someone should share rhizomes with you and you only get 2 or 3, which is common in trading these, you would start in a smaller, like 3 or 4 inch pot, and then as the plant fills and grows, move it up as it goes. So next year, this 6-inch pot might be large enough to transplant into a basket if you don't divide. So it's that simple. The key is moisture. They like to be not too wet, but they never like to get bone dry. These plants will actively grow from the rhizomes. As soon as you have 3 sets of leaves, the leaves will come in pairs off the stalk. When you first get sprouts and they reach the 3 leaf size, pinch out the tip, leaving 2 sets of leaves. We're going to do that twice when we get 3 sets of leaves each time from those. That will cause a bushier, fuller plant with more blooms, and it hardly delays blooming at all, maybe just a week or 2. So these typically will come up, grow rapidly, start flowering about June, sometimes some earlier, some later, but they'll begin blooming in June. Beautiful impatiens or almost small petunia-like flowers that bloom all through the latter part of summer. It becomes a little challenging in August and September because these plants have grown, they've filled the pot, and that is when watering needs will be the highest. And once they've done a good bit of flowering and are well into the season, drying out completely or getting too dry will trigger dormancy, and the plant will begin shutting down. It's natural in September or so to see leaves start to yellow and the plant begin to decline. We just start cutting back slightly on water. But if you let them get too dry one time, you'll trigger that process and can shorten how long you have blooms. So moisture is important, but it's no different than any other hanging basket or high water requirement or something that just requires attention. Watch them. They're not hard to grow at all, but the watering can be a little challenging. Speaking of watering, being in the African violet family and being that one of their names is hot water plant, there's a million different little stories as to why these are called hot water plants. But one potential theory is that just like African violets, if we water with cold water when it's not warm, you can get this kind of spotting. This is generally, now there may be some other things going on here, but it looks very similar to this kind of thing where you get tan or brown spots and streaks on the leaves. That's just cold water. Typically tap water later in the summer will be adequate, but you can also water from the side or bottom just like African violets without any problem. There's also an easy way to water called wick watering. I won't get into it here, but it would involve putting some sort of absorbent cord or string into this and then setting this where the cord is in water, but this is not. Look at that online, see if that's not something that might benefit you. They are fairly heavy feeders. This is a timed release product that you all are familiar with. We could do that at potting, or actually I would wait until they've begun growing to fertilize, or you can just use the water-soluble stuff that I rely heavily on. I'm talking about all those things. There's lots of brand names. You put a tablespoon of the blue or green stuff in a gallon of water. I would cut that lightly or heavily so that you're only applying a light fertilization, maybe quarter to half strength every 2 weeks during the growing season as part of one of your regular waterings. If the soil is overly dry, never fertilize dry soil. Water first, give it a few hours, then come back with your fertilizer so you don't overdo. The last thing I want to cover is what you do at the end of the season. Now this won't be necessary this first year. Usually achemones can remain in the same pot for 2 or 3 years without getting overly crowded. At that point, you're probably going to need to either divide the rhizomes. I should mention, some are very fast multipliers, some are slow multipliers, so everybody's plants will vary. But end of the season, after 2 or 3 years, even if you don't separate these individual rhizomes to other pots or to share with friends, you're going to want to add fresh soil. So every 2 or 3 years when the pots become crowded, this is one, the purple one I've grown for decades. I obtained it at a nursery I worked at when someone brought one in to be repotted, and when I had finished repotting, or actually my partner had finished repotting, there were these little rhizomes laying on the potting table. So he stuck some in a pot, brought them home, and sure enough, we were introduced to achemones. I've loved them ever since. Simply knew there were more, but there's very hard to find the rhizomes for sale. So I was thrilled. The rhizomes you're receiving came from Cartou's Greenhouses in California. I love the place. It's 2 elderly gentlemen who have run the business for years. They also do all sorts of exotic, wonderful house plants. So I'm giving you this information during their shipping window. They only make these available from February through April each year. So I'm trying to get you this information a little ahead of our class date, so if you wanted to add more varieties, there might be time to do so. So I'll provide that information in the email you receive. Back to the busting these up and repotting. This was last year's old foliage. For winter storage, it is literally as simple as stopping watering and putting them in a cool, dark place. You don't want the soil to become totally bone dry. But similarly, you do not want to keep it moist. So usually I'll find myself adding a tiny bit of water about once a month through the winter. Now granted, I store them in my basement, which is 55. That's near excellent. Some people every year bust up their rhizomes, put them in bags like this, and store them in a cool area. It's a little riskier, and don't steal the bags. I like to just leave them in the pot, and if I haven't messed up my watering this year, I'm going to find extra rhizomes. This particular one has pinkish rhizomes, which you can see right here. And when you do this, be very, very gentle. There will be rhizomes of all sizes, and we're literally going to have to sift through this to find all these little gems. There's one that would have been easy to miss, and they still have some soil on them at this point. So I'm going to very carefully go through and try to find every rhizome I can in this pot, and as we get closer to the surface, we're going to find more of them. This had been in the pot for a couple of years, so I expect this to be a treasure trove. It's also a variety that I love called Purple Queen that is known to be very vigorous. So you can see what I'm doing here, and you can see, I hope you can see how many little rhizomes there are. There are large ones, there are little small ones. I really like this variety because the pink ones stand out and are fairly easy to find. Oh, here's a fine example. I have broken a big rhizome in half accidentally. That's where the hot pink color is coming from. These two halves will make their own plants, so don't discard the broken ones. And I won't take all my time in doing this. I'm anticipating getting about 20-30 rhizomes out of this that I can repot or share with friends. It's very interesting that these are so rare and hard to come by because they're wonderful plants. Part of that is that in the spring season when nurseries are open, they're not flowering or doing much, so it's not something that sells well until they're flowering later in summer. And the growth and process is labor intensive, so it's not something that lends itself to mass production. But I think you're going to love them. I hope you're going to love them as much as I do. It's a no-brainer plant. Winter storage could not be simpler. It's just leave the pot dried out all summer. And I hope I've done a good job of introducing you to Achemones. I was so excited to find a supplier for other colors, pinks and whites and things, and I may have ordered 10 or a bunch more of these things for my own personal collection. So I'm happy to share with you, and I love the opportunity to tell you about things you might not otherwise encounter. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope it gives you something to do while we're trapped inside. And again, have any questions? I don't know what our future holds in terms of office being open and stuff, but we will be checking emails. We will be returning phone calls, whether we're from home or not. So know we're here for you for questions you may have. It just may take a day or two to get the response back, but feel free as always to reach out at any time. This is Jamie Dockery, going to sign you off and send you home with these. We're doing our pickup for these plants at the usual class time, but instead of congregating people, I'm going to be out front, curbside. We're going to ask people to circle our circle driveway, just like school pickup for kids, and I'm going to hand you your bag through the window. We're going to email you this video ahead of time so you can shop for others or be preparing for that handout that comes in April. Thank you so much. Have a great day.